Yeah, man. I think it is. There are a lot of people who have insane skills at random things, and sometimes I guess what is interesting to me is then you look at Tesla and the dude died broke, but
Yeah, with a bunch of pigeons and pneumonia and
yeah, clearly it wasn't. To me, when anybody's talking about what motivates people, it's clear that money didn't motivate this guy because he could have been the richest person on the planet, but the only reason he wasn't is because he wanted to make his technology useful for humanity. So the guy that was building these things wasn't trying to ri- rich or rip people off so he could get rich. So he got to a point where he had done so many things and built so many things that at any point he could have used these things just for pure self enrichment, but he didn't do that. And the notion that money is what motivates people to do the greatest things has him as the biggest counterpoint. And I always wonder how people can make that argument about money being the biggest motivator and how capitalism has gotten us the farthest and still like talk about Nikola Tesla at all because those two things don't jive, period.
is it capitalism or is it conquest that delivers the on
I mean, people say you hear a lot of people give credit to capitalism specifically, and it's a lot of libertarian, um, pro Western capitalism people. So
yeah.
there's a red scare happening because a lot of people are trying to assert capitalism's historical dominance over any other economic system or political system when you conflate the two, so they can prove to people and get them to not go into socialism.
But socialism and well, I feel like we want our economic systems to be able to play nice in the playground, but I feel like on some level socialism isn't really can't really function with capitalism. Like there's a system for keeping track of resource allocation and the ability for people to, let's say, like, you want to learn how to play the piano. Well, you should be able to go sign up somewhere and learn how to play the piano, and if you stick with it for long enough, you should be able to fill out some paperwork, and lo and behold, a piano will be delivered to your house, or a digital piano.
Mm-hmm.
And eventually, if you play long enough, you might get asked to play places, and eventually they'll give you pianos to play, like real pianos. And eventually, after a lifetime, you will own a fancy fucking piano because
Mm-hmm.
you'll have earned it, and the state will be like, yo, this is yours now. You can play anywhere you want, because that's kind of how socialism should work for that kind of example. And I realize I leave out a lot of details, and it's kind of like you know, we're talking about pianos.
Well, I mean, but that's what you're talking about is now
But that's not,
socialist government, not socialist economics.
yeah.
Because people conflate the two and act like they're the same thing for
Well,
the sake of trying. And this is another, like, socialist government. That was okay. When the argument for socialism was made, it was very uh, broad. It was never very specific in the first place. Like the Marxist argument for socialism didn't get into specifics and details. It went into very broad
yeah.
utopian swaths of painting pictures of how things should be,
I think
and
my
didn't.
my my need for the state to be involved in that kind of weird piano playing scenario is that at some point somebody has to write down these things.
And keep track. I mean,
That's where the state should be involved, is tracking.
but that's okay. But
That's
what
kind of
so I'm only painting the difference between a state or socialist government and socialist economics for the sake of articulating how these things would play out differently. So what you're talking about would be a socialist government.
yeah.
A socialist economic example would be Volkswagen. That is a socialist company, or was a socialist company. It was started, owned by the state. Any profits went to the people.
Yeah.
It was presumably people could have just gotten a job there because it was owned by the state. Obviously, you would have to have proper skills, but if it's owned by the state, then you can't necessarily get turned away from the job if you have the proper skills. So that's kind of one of the things about a state-owned company that would elicit the quality of a socialist economic system. Now, the thing that would keep that socialist economic
state music school
is if you also have Mercedes, you also have Lexus, you also have all these other companies. Now, if Volkswagen's the only company, then that drifts back into socialist government.
Yeah.
But having just Volkswagen as a state-owned car company, but also having all these other private companies, that's socialist economics. It doesn't mean you can only have Volkswagen. It means Volkswagen as a state-owned option exists so that people aren't getting fucked when the government is actually subsidizing all these research investments anyway, and then they're all going to private companies. So what ends up happening is what people call socialist government is actually, what's the word? Oligarchic welfare in a lot of cases. So it'll be it'll seem like these parties are working for the people in their rhetoric, but then they're actually giving out a bunch of subsidies to corporations on the back end, and then the corporations are saying they're going to go hire the people. So it's this weird combination of state subsidies with private profits, and then the people get jobs, and they don't actually get direct monetary returns, such as so like for a while British Petroleum, they would give payments.
Now they're called Beyond Petroleum.
But they would give payments to the citizens for, I think, up to like 2008 or so. It was 2006 or 2008 or so.
I know that people in Alaska used to get paid for
exactly.
living in Alaska.
So that's socialism. That's socialism. But when it actually would benefit the American people, then it gets scary, because then you won't have to depend on corporations as much, and they know that. So you can't have. The big problem is that these corporations know they can't compete with the state-owned option.
Yeah.
That's the biggest argument. So then if you can't compete with the state-owned option, doesn't that mean the state-owned option is the best option? By definition.
Well, you'd think that would work, except GM continues to make crap.
But it's because
GM is actually more of a financial institution at this point, so that's not really a good model.
No.
Ford, they didn't take the bailout, and Chrysler is owned by the Italians now, and they're being sold pieced out, so.
But then, as you're saying, all these things end up getting
Volkswagen's
subsidies.
the biggest car company in the world right now. They're bigger than Toyota. Toyota's huge.
Started off state-owned.
I think we're about to see a wave of Chinese cars that all happen to look like Japanese and Korean cars, and a few that look like European cars, and a few that are I'm pretty sure. No, I'm almost positive that Volvo's owned by a Chinese holding company now. The Chinese are pretty smart. They've been buying up American heritage brands like Rawlings, the baseball glove manufacturer. They're owned by a Chinese company now.
Huh.
And what else? Maker's Mark, the whiskey. They're owned by a Chinese company. There's a bunch of whiskeys I think that I'm pretty sure they're owned by a Chinese, the same Chinese holding company. They're buying up all
and then
sorts of.
When people get nostalgic for them, they're gonna start selling them back, and then I remember that good old Maker's Mark.
It's still made in
Chinese
America.
money.
Yeah, Chinese money. Well,
and that's some economic warfare and psychological warfare, where you're buying up nostalgia. Now you own nostalgia. When people want to get that feeling they had from high school, they got to go to Chinese vendors now.
Oh wow.
American nostalgia is not owned by America. That's some serious psychological warfare right there. I mean, but that's colonialism 101, which is where all this shit that Chinese and Russians are doing against us that Americans did to other people.
The Chinese were notorious for building like the crap, right? We used to that's their.
That was the rhetoric.
That was the rhetoric. They build shitty products, but they own Volvo. And Volvo is like the safest car on the road at any size. Like that should elicit a, like, you know, severe, like almost like mind-stopping level of cognitive dissonance.
Yeah.
But then they're releasing this electric car called Polestar 1, I believe, and it's supposed to be some like, you know, Tesla Roadster fast luxury subscription-based car where you subscribe for a period of time and they maintain the vehicle, and at the end of the period they take it back and they give you a different one.
That's how all these models used to work in America, man.
Yep.
Whether it's the milk or like the washing machines, a lot of this shit was more subscription-esque, where they would service it. And
the milk, you'd leave your bottles out, and then in the morning the milkman would swap them out.
Yep, and then all this shit got to be throwaway consumerist. And then we get blamed for it. That's the craziest shit about it. All this shit happened before either of us were born.
Man.
And then we get blamed for throwaway culture.
So, do you remember?
We're young.
Do you remember milk? Do you remember ever seeing milk come in plastic bags?
No.
When I moved to Bloomington, when I moved to Indiana, when I was like 10 years old, I had never seen this before in my life in California. But I saw milk in the stores in plastic bags. And they sold these special jugs that you'd place it in, and you could cut off the end and fold it and hold it and pinch the end off. And I thought, well, this is really kind of weird. And then I would go to school, and they had milk in a plastic bag. And I thought, like, well, this is really strange. I've never seen it. It's always in a carton or like a miniature plastic mini jug thing. I had never seen that until I came to Bloomington. It was the weirdest thing. And then it went away. Like a few years later, after that, I never saw them again.
Huh.
And I haven't seen them since.
That's very dangerous.
A plastic bag full of milk.
That sounds like it's going to end terribly every single time.
See, in my mind, that's the kind of thing that some, you know, college student would have taken and set on like a heat vent someplace. It caused all sorts of nightmare problems for their dorm or something.
Yeah.
Or you just leave it outside and let it get really hot. For several days, let it turn into cheese.
Throw them in open car windows when people drive by. That just I can just imagine all kinds of terrible shit to do as a kid. Like
so. Milk is weird stuff. It has so much weird crap in it. Like, I don't really like thinking about like the blood and pus that's contained in cow milk that they bleach and like pull out with centrifuge and expose to other chemicals to like kill whatever's fucking in it.
Yeah.
I feel like someday somebody will invent like a soy milk that is, maybe it won't be a soy, maybe it'll just be some kind of like protein liquid that'll actually taste good, that won't be chalky. That'll like render itself kind of milky.
You would think that at some point they would be able to produce lactase and lactose out of some sort of chemical combination where it does just spit out the molecules in the perfect proportions in the perfect places, so it doesn't have any bullshit in there.
Oh, wouldn't that be cool if like a powdered milk basically.
Yeah,
That you,
but it's perfect.
but it comes out and like you shake it a bunch and it gets all bubbly and then all the bubbles just collapse and then it turns into milk.
Yeah.
Something like that. And give it a cool reaction so that people are interested in making it happen.
Yeah.
And give it some like rules, like you can't make more than like a half a gallon at a time, because even in a big bucket, the reaction would be violent enough that it would get out of the bucket.
Yeah.
Just by having that much powder and that much water combining at once. But if you do less than like 3/4 of a gallon, it's safe for some reason. I mean, build some component like that, because nobody needs to make a gallon of milk all at once. You can make 2 separate containers if you really need to.
Yeah. What do you need like 30 gallons of milk for?
Yeah. Throw it in a pool.
Yeah. Nobody needs 30 gallons of milk all at once.